Hey, you've summoned a lesser maker. I've been working on a concept to upgrade this building. I'm going to cut it away from the board, and I'm going to turn this building from this to this. First, I'd kind of need to know the dimensions of the area, so I'm tracing out the space I have to work with, and I'm going to be cutting it away and basing the size on these dimensions. I'm going to put the board back onto the wall. I've cut out a floor plan, and we're going to use this, and now we're going to erect the walls to build the basic shape of this concept sketch. I'm building this out of foam core board. I buy this material off of Amazon, and this is different than the stuff you get at the Dollar Tree with the paper lining. This has like a small thin film on either side of the foam, and this is much easier to work with because you don't have to peel off the paper, and because the film is still there, the foam is a little easier to work with. I've noticed that spray paint doesn't harm this foam as much because you're not exposing a foam directly to the paint. It has that slight film. It is a little different to texture though, but for me, that's a trade-off I'm willing to make. I always have a hard time balancing the playability of my terrain and the stylized look of it. And so in this build in particular, I'm heavily favoring the stylized, especially at the beginning part. I'm blocking out the shapes. And then at the very end, that's when I start making sure that everything is playable and I get a miniature in and making sure that it is the way I want it. Cut out a couple long thin triangles to make this tower. I glued together 3 of the sides, and then I just glued the 2 sides down to the sheet and cut it out. I figured that would be the easiest way to make this shape, and it definitely sped up the process. Kind of gave it a bit of a tilt to one side as well, which is something I wanted because this is a destroyed building after all. After that, I put in all the roof shapes with some chipboard. And I just made sure that I blocked out the shapes and made sure that they kind of melded in close together, because this is what I'll be gluing all the shingles to. And I have a cool, quick way of doing that, and I'll show you that in a little bit later. I wanted to do a big section of this in cobblestone, and so I'm going to be cutting out all those like unused scraps of the foam core that I use while building this and cut them into like just non-specific square shapes. I'm going to be tumbling this in a plastic container with a couple rocks, and that will soften all the edges as well as put a like rock texture on all the foam cobblestones. And I'm just gonna I've seen people use this with XPS bricks, but I use it with the foam core sheets because that's what I have, and I think it looks really convincing, and when you layer it all up on the side, it looks really nice. The nice thing about this is you can use all the foam core that like would be going into the trash can, and anything you can do to save it going into a trash bag. I don't know. It's a satisfying way of making sure that the shapes aren't all that consistent, and you can use every scrap bit that you have. So I went in with Elmer's glue for all these cobblestones, and I kind of regretted it. It took forever to dry. No joke, like almost 2 days. And they were just like swimming around the entire time. because later I have to cut in all the windows in these cobblestones. And I think I've used Elmer's glue before. Maybe it was a different type of glue, maybe Eileen's tacky glue, but it just didn't set. It was raining where I live, so it had an effect of it, but it wasn't all that humid, and I don't know. So that maybe I'm just complaining too much, but I would recommend using the Eileen's tacky glue or maybe some fast set wood glue. But that was one day of building, and now we're on to the next day. Got a cup of coffee, and we're going to start again. I 3D printed some windows from my Building Accessories STL pack that's free on my Patreon if you want to go download it. If you like it, there's an option to $5 donate on the shop tab for the Patreon. Either way, it's free. Why not try it out? If you want glue to adhere to resin, 3D resin, it's really important to make sure that it's really, really cured. So I washed it real well and I let it like over bake almost underneath the UV lamp. And then I finished up the cobblestones. Now I'm going to start making this building as playable as possible. I decided that like basically this whole back part has just got to go. Make sure that there's enough space for hands and miniatures to go in here. I also start inserting all of the windows. I basically press in the window and it gives me a good outline to start cutting out all of the shapes. And because all the cobblestones are wet, there are inevitably some spots where the glue and the cobblestones start peeling off. And when I started working on the tower, I just figured it might be easier to just kind of cut the whole thing off and start modifying it there. And it kind of morphed into a bit of a watchtower that I ended up liking a lot. I'm going to be gluing together these pieces into kind of a large bay window. Instead of using hot glue, I'm using super glue gel and accelerator. And I feel like this has a better bond and it allows me to work fast. When I go back to gluing things onto the model itself, I will go back to hot glue, but as far as speed and making sure that the glue bond between all these small pieces, super glue gel is definitely the way to go. And accelerator's a necessity as far as this is concerned. And I just glued that right onto the large peaked face that we haven't really touched yet. And I pressed in another window as well onto the top section. I cut a hole in the roof to kind of add a third level to this building and added a walkway to the front. And with some more chipboard, I just started adding trim, kind of line out and clean up the edges of all the like bare foam core sides to make sure that the texture is pretty consistent in all areas. I put a miniature in to just kind of test out the playability of this, and I kind of eyeballed all this stuff. I didn't really plan this out too much as far as window heights. There isn't a template this week, but overall I'm pretty happy with this. I think some of the windows are a little low, but it does work and it's playable. I added a third level on the inside to make sure that the walkway in the front makes sense, and the improvised tower is accessed on the outside and has some walkways available. And the material I use for this is just some balsa wood. There isn't really a wrong material to use, but just in case you're curious, while I was adding that third level, on this right side of the peak, I wanted to add some access to the front section of this third level because there wasn't all that much space for hands and miniatures. So I added a tear across the top of the roof, and this looked really cool. It wasn't something I had initially planned, obviously. I don't know, happy accidents are kind of my favorite part of this building process. Now I'm gonna start stuccoing the gaps between all these cobblestones, and I've never really gotten this perfect. Even this time it wasn't exactly the way I'd like it. I'd like it to be a little more recessed past the stones to make sure that each stone is pretty visible. Basically, I mixed Mod Podge, water, and spackle, at 1-to-1-to-1 mix, and then I just kind of brushed that into the recesses. I used a palette knife to kind of make sure it was super flat, and before it completely hardened, I went in with a damp sponge and I washed off all the stones, or maybe a softer sponge to get in between each stone and kind of round out all those edges. So the shingles this time was a huge game changer. I used a self-adhesive cork sheet that I got from the Dollar Tree, and I typically use scallop scissors to cut my shingles, but I use chipboard, and you have to apply glue every time and make sure it doesn't dry or whatever. But this self-adhesive cork, you could just peel and stick it right on. I did this whole house in 45 minutes, and if you've applied shingles before, you know that it can take hours. This adhesive was really great, and the cork, you could separate the shingles real easily because the cork is kind of fragile, and if it falls apart, it looks really good. So I recommend that you grab one of these, get some scallop shingles, and try this out for yourself because it was really great. I think you definitely have to apply a couple layers of Mod Podge or PVA glue to make sure the shingles are stuck together really well, because the adhesive isn't a permanent adhesive, but it does tack it in while you can glue it after, all in one go, and that saves so much time. So 10 out of 10 would recommend. While I start laying down the base coats, I'm going to thank my Patreon members. These guys support the free STL packs that I develop for you guys for free, and they get early access to those as I develop them. They also help fund each and every video that I put out every week, and I appreciate that so much. I took a couple weeks off over the holiday, and work was insane. I really appreciate these guys for sticking around throughout the break. So thank you to Leroy, Moonbad, Fetter, Caracal, Old School FRP, Burning Heart Custom Creations, James, Anders, Hanover, Grim Drunk, Treborius, and Andy. You guys are so great, and I appreciate it so much. If you want to become a Patreon member, it's only $2 a month, and I'm a small channel, so that extra $2, it goes so far to help support all the stuff that I'm developing and creating for you guys. If you don't know, everything on Patreon is basically free, except for the stuff that's in early access. But eventually that stuff will become free too. That will continually become a resource. You can become a free member and get email notifications whenever anything is updated, and you can get something to download. So feel free to check out the Patreon and just window shop. Surprise, surprise, I painted the roof green. So I kind of just do the painting the same way I always do. That way everything looks consistent and it can integrate pretty easily with this board. I kind of tried to do a gradient from lighter green to darker green, put in some of the tan for the Tudor housing sections, and tried to make it a little lighter in the middle than the sides. But really I just kind of let it kind of do whatever it wanted. After that, I painted all the windows like a brassy oxidized green bronze. Now let's fit it into the board. Well, crap, it's too big. But maybe I'll just kind of redo this whole section of the board. Have a good one.